So we will start today with the talk of Ana Cidre. She comes from San Sencio, and she will be speak about Angular. So thank you for coming. Moreover, she is pregnant, so we have to give her more thank you for coming today. So we will start, and she will explain better than me.
Okay, thank you. I can speak Spanish, but when I give talks, my Spanish isn't that good, so I prefer to give it in English because it's my native language. If there's any questions, just stop me and maybe I can help you translate or anything. I'll try to speak slowly. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about reusable web components with Angular. And just before we start, I want to give a small introduction about myself. So I'm a developer advocate for Ultimate courses. I don't know if anyone knew Ultimate Angular, the courses online. No? Well, we now have expanded and we give React courses, Vue, and all sorts of other courses. So if you're interested, just let me know and we'll see what we can do. And as you can see, I'm very involved with the community. I'm also an organizer of GDG, but in Beagle. I'm a Women Tech Maker ambassador. I'm the founder of Girls Tech, which is a group for women in tech from Galicia. And I'm also the organizer of NG Vikings, which is in Copenhagen in 3 weeks, a really cool event. And the first NG Spain, which will be in Madrid this October. So stay tuned, because there's going to be some really cool announcements. Right. How many of you know what a web component is? More or less? Yeah? Okay. And how many of you have tried to build a web component? Come on, raise your hands. Put your hands up. And last but not least, anyone played around with Angular elements? How many of you work with Angular? Okay, that's good to know. So I'm not going to go too much in depth. Sorry, I just didn't want that there. I'm not going to go too much in depth with web components today. I'm going to talk more about web components with Angular. But if you're interested, you can check out this talk I gave in Atlanta. The top one are the slides and the bottom's the video. And here I actually go in depth about what are web components, how to create it with vanilla.js and all of this. So later on, I'll share the slides with Tony and he'll pass them on to you, so don't worry. Okay, so what is a web component? I'm going to go over them very briefly. A web component is a component that is platform agnostic. We always love this term, platform agnostic, right? It means we don't have to worry about which platform we're doing it on. Also, the cool thing about web components is that we can completely encapsulate them, so there's no styling or behavioral leakages in or out. So for example, if someone touches the global CSS, it won't hurt our web component, which is pretty cool, because it's happened to me quite often that I get back to a project and then everything has changed because someone has touched the global CSS. But web components don't let that happen. And also, we can exchange web components throughout teams. So I can give a web component to someone who's working on Angular or on Vue. React hasn't really caught up yet, but Preact has, and Skate is also in there. So there's quite a few frameworks that allow us to use web components. If you want to know more about whether your framework allows you to use web components, you can check out this really cool website by Rob Dodson, Custom Elements Everywhere. And they give he tells you exactly what is included and what isn't in your framework. But, because we're going to be talking about Angular today, as you can see, Angular is fully compatible with web components. You don't have to worry about it. Cool, so web components consist of 3 main technologies. HTML template, which is basically a HTML tag called template, which we then clone as many times as we like, and the browser will only pass it once. This means that our application will be a lot faster. Custom elements, which is where we define our HTML tag, so we can create a web component and call it whatever we want to. And last but not least, we have Shadow DOM. And Shadow DOM is what allows us to have that encapsulation, especially the styling encapsulation, so we don't have any leakages. So this is a very simple button I created. We're going to see the code now in a second. And this is a web component which I called SA button. This would be our web component, and as you can see, there are 2 attributes. Text, which is a custom attribute that I gave it, and style. Now, I don't know if you've played around with CSS variables, but this is how we declare CSS variables. We can use these outside of web components. We can use it in any sort of CSS. And the good thing about CSS variables is that it lets other developers style the web component however they want to. So they can change the background color, they can change the font, and otherwise, because of the encapsulation, this would not be possible. So how do we define these CSS variables? When creating, this is just pure JavaScript, it's not Angular. When creating our web component, in the styling, we have to call on the CSS variables variable, parenthesis, dash dash, you also have to add dash dash to CSS variables, and whatever name you like. I tend to copy the name so that the developers already know what to use. And then a default color, or weight, or height, or whatever you need to add there. And then that's the HTML template that we have at the bottom. Next up is our custom elements. So custom elements are actually extended from HTML element, which provides us with quite a few cool methods like connected callback. Again, I'm not going too in depth with web components today, but I just wanted to show you how easily we can add shadow DOM. What we do is we clone the template to our shadow DOM instead of to the DOM. And then you're done. You have shadow DOM, you have the encapsulation. Pretty simple step. And then to actually call or name our custom element, we just call the custom elements.define method, which is supported natively by many browsers now. We'll take a look at the browsers at the end. And then you give it a name and a selector. And that's it. So, as we're not going to be talking about just web components, let's see what we will be talking about today. First of all, we're going to see how we can create a web component with Angular, and then we're going to see how we can actually add an existing web component into an Angular project. Then we're going to see how they can communicate, so how do web components communicate with Angular components. And last but not least, let's take a quick look into the future. Okay, so let's get started. Creating a web component with Angular. Well, thanks to the Angular team, we have something called Angular Elements. And Angular Elements allow us to create a web component with the whole ecosystem that Angular provides and all the tooling without having to learn any new languages. So it's really cool. So first of all, if you don't have Angular installed, you need to install it. And then what we need to do is create a new project. The flags I have added are just personal preferences. They are not needed to create Angular Elements. Next up, we go into our project and we add Angular Elements. So far, pretty simple. Next, what we need to do is install our web components and save custom elements and save this. And this is for all of the polyfills that we need. And then in our polyfills file, we need to import this just so that we have access to the polyfills. And last but not least, we need to change our target to ES 2015 because browsers that can actually read web components natively require this. Otherwise, they can't read it. And then, just like we normally would, we just generate a component. In this case, we call it button. And those of you who work with Angular know that a simple component would look something like this. There is no Angular element inside. It's just a simple Angular component. So let's turn it into an Angular element, or into a web component. First, what we need to do is give it some template. And we need to add the inputs so that we have access from the outside so that other developers can change it later on. And then we need to add the shadow DOM, the encapsulation. Now this might seem tricky, but Angular has done an amazing job and it's very, very simple. All we need is the view encapsulation.shadow DOM, so we have that encapsulation. And to do so, inside our component directive, we first have to import view encapsulation. We add encapsulation and we just say view encapsulation.shadow DOM. And you have your shadow DOM. That's it. Next, we need to define our custom element so that when we actually build it, it is available to the outside world. This is pretty simple. We need to move on to our module. We're going to import the create custom element from the Angular elements, which we're going to use in just a second. But before we dive into that, we need to take the bootstrapping away. There's always bootstrap of our whole application. We need to take that off, and we need to define that it's going to be just an entry component that we want to build, and in this case, it's our button component. Then we're going to export it, and here is where we use that create custom element method that I was talking about, and that's just so that we have access to that method that we had previously. So the custom elements.define, and again we give it a name and a selector. And this is what we want to bootstrap up. So here's where we do an ng-do bootstrap. And that's your custom element done. So pretty simple, right? Well, the thing is, I think we all know that with Angular, things aren't that simple. So what isn't that simple? Now, if I were to do an ng build here, I would have a big problem because Angular CLI isn't ready for it. Hopefully with Ivy, which I'll talk about in a second, it will be. But right now, what would happen? We would have a huge bundle size. So if we wanted to import this so-called web component into another application, we're basically putting one application inside of another. And we know that Angular isn't exactly the lightest framework out there, it's pretty heavy. And also, Angular doesn't have support for one bundle. So if I wanted to import a web component, normally we'd want to do it like a normal Angular component, right? Where we just put import, the name of the component from wherever, and then use it within our component. But at the moment we have two bundles and not one. Now there are some hacky methods out there where we can like eject Webpack and do all sort of funky stuff, but it gets pretty complicated. But I'm not here to give you problems, I'm trying to find solutions. And my good friend, Manfred Steyer, has made this amazing library called NGX Build Plus. After he made this library, the Angular team was like, come work with us. And he was like, okay. So now he works on the Angular team too with the tooling. And what does this library do? So what it does, you don't have to eject your Webpack. It just extends the CLI. You can also tell it not to build two bundles, but one, which is very handy for what we'll see in 1 second. And this way we can also say that we want to exclude Angular Core, RxJS, Angular Elements, everything that we don't need in a web component, because these files are not necessary. And the best part, it's really simple to use. So how do we implement the NGX Build Plus? First of all, we add it to our project. We make sure, this is normally done for you, but you have to make sure that it is there, that the builder has changed to NGX Build Plus build. And then we create a file called webpack.extra.js. And here is going to go everything that you don't want included into your web component. So this is like the normal stuff that you would add, but if you were adding, I don't know, NGRX or something, you could also add that in here. And then you just build it. So here I'm saying to include that extra file in Webpack, and that I just want one bundle, I don't want two. And that's it, it's done. So now we have our component. Now we've built it with Angular. Up to here, that's all we've done. So say I had a web component, how could I add that into an Angular project? Or how could I add this web component into another Angular project? Ah, wait, I want to talk about Ivy. So we keep getting told that Ivy is going to be added into the next version. I think we've been waiting 2 versions now. I've heard from the Angular team that in version 8 it won't be released. It's going to be behind the flag, but it's going to be a lot more stable and we can really test it and give feedback. We can already test it. It's available behind the flag. But in version 9 it will be available and it'll be fully functional. So what will we achieve through Ivy? We're going to have that flexibility. We're going to say whether we want 1 bundle or 2 bundles. We can also get, like, the size reduction is amazing. I've tested it and it's like so small. So once you have smaller lines of code and less code, obviously things really get speedy. So yeah, until we have Ivy, we can use NGX Build Plus. Okay, so now how do we use our web component inside of an Angular project? First of all, what we need to do is install the polyfills just like we did before. Then we're going to import them into our polyfills.ts file. And this part is pretty important. So what we're doing here is we're telling Angular, look, there isn't just Angular components, there are also other sorts of components. The good thing is, if you forget this step, if you use Chrome DevTools, it will shout at you and be like, look, it looks like there is something that's not an Angular component. Maybe you need to add your schemas array. And then you can't really forget. So And then all we do is we import all from our web component, and then we say where it's located, and then we just use it. So it's really simple to use web components inside of an Angular project. It's like 2 steps. Now, I get asked a lot, but okay, if I think about my Angular architecture, how do I add a web component inside of this architecture? Well, I always say follow the best practices, right? So in this case, I think we all know that the best practice for Angular is the one-way data flow, where we emit data down, emit events up and data down. So say, for example, that button I wanted to add into my architecture. What would I do? Well, I would put it right at the bottom, because a button shouldn't be handling data. It should just be emitting events. And once that button is clicked and an event is triggered, that should be passed up to its parent component, which will then be passed up to its container component. That's where the data is handled. But before being handled, what it does is it takes it up to the service, takes the event up to the service handles everything it needs to do, and passes the data back down to whichever component is handling that data. So if you want to remember how this data flow works, you can look at this really silly photo of me and my friend, and it's events up, data down. We actually dress like that for Angular Connect, so yeah. And here is our super complicated application. No, I'm joking, it's very simple. With the web component buttons, all of the buttons are the same web component that were just reused. And on any slide where you see this little GitHub logo or StackBlitz, once I share the slides, you can go in there and see the actual code and the source code and dive in deeper and play around if you want to. Okay, so up to now, we've seen how we can create a web component with Angular. We've seen how we can add a web component to an Angular project, and we see how they can communicate with one another. So, can we say that web components rock? Obviously, I'm a bit biased, and I think they're really, really amazing, but I want to kind of transmit why I think this. So, like I said before, you have maximum interoperability. Say you're working in a very big company, and there's somebody that works with Vue, someone that works with Preact, someone that works with Angular, and you all need the same thing. Well, you can just create one web component and use it across 3 teams, which is very useful. And also, more and more frameworks are allowing you to create web components with the framework, so like you don't have to learn another language. You can use Angular, and even Vue is starting now too. And there are so many success stories out there. You can go and read them. For example, ING now, with all of the features that they have, they're making them just with web components. And BBVA has translated everything to web components. And now the tricky part that worries us developers a lot. How are the browsers looking? Well, as you can see, they're fully stable. Edge will be Edge. And we just have to wait, but they're developing it, so soon. They've been developing for about 6 months now, so hopefully soon it will all be ready. But in the meantime, we have very, very good polyfills. So the browser really is not an excuse. Now let's take a quick look into the future. How many of you have heard of lit-HTML? Nobody? Okay, well this is a library created by the Polymer team. It's interesting because it was a proposal by Apple, and then Google got on board, and now the Polymer team has created this library. And it's a bit like JSX in the fact that we have a change detection, but what it does is it uses all of the native browser's potentials. So it's not another templating language. What we can use is HTML, and then we have our JS template literals inside of the HTML. And because it's using everything from the browser, it's really, really speedy. And also we have some directives in there which are pretty cool. I actually converted my button into lit-HTML. Again, the StackBlitz logo, later on you can click on it and you will actually see the code. It's very, very simple. I shipped less lines of code with lit-HTML, and I think it's really cool. If you don't know lit-HTML, I'm assuming you don't know lit-element either. And this is the next step of lit HTML. It's created by the same person, Justin Vignani. There's a really good video where he's presenting lit element at the Chrome Dev Summit last year in November. And what he's talking about is how awesome it is, because it's really awesome. It's probably my favorite project at the moment. And it's basically a base class for web components. So everything that we had to do before manually, like adding the render function within the connector callback, we don't have to do that anymore because lit element does it all for you. And you don't have to tell it to detect the change detection because it does it automatically. And what it does is, for example, in the virtual DOM, what would happen is if there's a change happening, it would re-render the whole page. Whereas with the lit element, it will only re-render that section of the page that needs to be re-rendered. So it really makes things very fast, very light, and it's just really awesome. Again, I changed it to lit element. You can go check out the code, no problem. Here's a little snippet from that video just to show you how cool it is. So in 4 lines of code, what he's doing is fetching a file, saying that it's loading, it's telling them, look, there's missing a file name here, and then an error message in 4 lines of code. I find that pretty cool. Okay, one thing I like to talk about, because I get asked about it a lot, is, for example, the CSS variables. Now, say I had 10 web components in a project, and each web component had 10 CSS variables. That would be a pain to change every single CSS variable, right? So I actually did a bit of investigation, and does anyone know about CSS shadow paths? I didn't either. And I found this really good article by Monica from the Polymer team. And what she says here is that when we create our web components, we just need to use the attribute part and name it, and then whatever we don't want developers to style from the outside, we just don't add the part attribute and they can't access it. So me, using that web component as a developer from the outside, I can just access the CSS by saying, okay, the web component is called xfoo part, and then the name that I want to do. And you can add all of the CSS that you want to here without doing every single CSS variable individually. And you can do it for hover, placeholder, whatever you need to do. So I thought that was really cool. And I said I'll speak slowly, but I think I spoke quite quickly, so sorry. And yeah, can we say that Angular loves web components? I think we can, because we really have the support from the Angular team. Every day they're trying to make it easier for us to create web components because they know that this is the future. I truly believe that in a couple of years, web components are going to be like everywhere. So thank you, and if you have any questions or any doubts, you can ask me in Spanish, it's fine.
Anyone has a question? No? I have one. So if I don't understand bad, probably yes. Exists something in Angular that in the CLI or in other or with other tools that allow you transform an Angular component to a web component?
Yeah, you just follow the same processes.
Yeah, but a transpiler or something that grabs the component.
As I know, you have to do it manually. So you have to add shadow DOM and then define it and then build it. There isn't anything that I know of. There might be, but podemos cambiar a español si queréis. Bueno, ¿qué os parece el tema de los componentes? ¿Sí? Sí. Tengo que darte esto.
Entonces, si entendí bien, la tendencia que tú crees que va a tener el mercado es que en el futuro haya componentes y en las distintas tecnologías, Angular, React, Vue o lo que sea, van a importar esos componentes y usar esos componentes.
Ya se puede hacer, ya puedes importar componentes web sin problema, simplemente tienes que importar los polyfills necesarios para IE11 y ya está.
Take the micro.
Okay.
Don't worry. So thank you so much for coming today to Orense. Give the talk in English. It's something new in our group. So thanks for that, because it's a new step. And that is all. I think the people enjoy the talk. I think that the talk it was really good. It was a very good resume about web components and how to use it. So thank you. There is a present for our group.
Thank you.
So the next breakfast. I hope that you can use it.
I collect mugs, so
oh,
thank
okay.
you.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you.